My name is Delegate Mudumo. I'm coming from Aquafeeds to present on fish nutrition and feeding. So I'm going to rush through how we feed our fish and the nutritional composition of the fish diets. Basically, the goal of every farmer who does fish production is to get his fish to grow as efficiently as possible. So, for the fish to grow well, the diets should include some nutrients, and these nutrients constitutes proteins, carbohydrates, fat oils, and other micro ingredients such as vitamins and minerals. Proteins are very essential in fish diets. Why? Because these consist of the building blocks that are needed for a fish to grow. I have some examples for our protein sources. These include the soya, the corn gluten, carcass meal, blood meal, fish meal, to mention a few. It is important that proteins are included in the diets, and these proteins have to be available and digestible for a fish to easily take up the nutrients. We'll move on to the other nutrient component, energy. Energy is required by a fish. Energy is there for important to a fish because it helps for metabolism and for fish movement. Or at least the fish is swimming, so there is need for energy. You would find that if there is not enough energy in the diet of fish, there are proteins. These proteins will then be converted to energy. So we end up having our fish not growing well. Why? Because we have already said the proteins are the building blocks of the fish. So the proteins will have been depleted, therefore standard growth. Just like proteins, the sources of carbohydrates, they have to be properly cooked. That process is called extrusion. Why do we have to extrude? We want to break the cell wall membranes of the ingredients so that the feed is always available for intake. Oils are also important in fish diets because they contribute a certain amount is contribute to energy and also condition of the feed of the fish. Oils are also important because they play a role in the physiological function of a fish. Usually when there are temperature changes, fish can easily adjust or adapt to those changes in temperature because they have oils. We also have the micro ingredients. These include the vitamins and minerals. Vitamins, for example, vitamin A. If there is no vitamin A in the fish diet, there is back deformities and standard growth in mostly in young fish. So you can actually see whenever a fish is under stress, there's need for vitamin A, and if this vitamin A is not available, then the fish will suffer. Vitamin A and E are key factors in maintaining reproduction. Extrusion, it's a process where we put our feed in high temperature over a short period. This will minimize the degradation of food nutrients, at the same time improving the digestibility of proteins and starches. And it has got some advantages. There is high digestive utilization ratio. During the process of extrusion, the heat and steam pressure will then promote the breaking up of the cell wall structures so as to release the digestible material for fish. Also, there is reduced pollution to the environment. Why? Because our feed will have to be so impact that it makes it possible for the reduction to dissolution and sedimentation of feed, thus reducing water pollution. There is a table, a comparison between the use of commercial feed and green water farming. Usually, the commercial feed is used in semi-intensive and intensive systems, where inputs are high and the outputs are also high. Whereas in green water farming, it is commonly used in extensive systems where inputs are low and the outputs are also relatively low. When we are using commercial feed, your growth rate will be high and it can be achieved and it can also be predictable. If the feed is used appropriately, then the farmer will have to know the size of the fish. He can actually predict the size of a fish over a certain period. Say after 4 months, my fish will be at 300 grams. Whereas in green water farming, there is low growth rate and it is very difficult to predict the growth of fish. Green water works well to sustain only fries and fingerlings, but it is not sufficient to support fast growth in bigger fish. When we are using the commercial feed, the survival rate is so high, so good, because the fish require a balanced diet, and these commercial feeds do have the required nutrients that support fish growth. So the survival rate is very high. Whereas in green water farming, if the fry and fingerlings do not get the nutrition, then they are at risk of poor survival rate. The cost in commercial feed, it is very high. Commercial feed is costly and the bulk of operational costs is and the bulk of the operational cost for a fish farmer is feed. So the cost is so high, whereas in green water farming, the cost is relatively low. Most of the organic fertilizers are easy to obtain. The examples are manure from poultry, from pigs. So a farmer can easily obtain those. The application of commercial feeds. This is based on recommendation, and this is based on recommendation of the feed manufacturer, and you have to follow a provided schedule. Overfeeding will then lead to wastages, whereas underfeeding will also result in a reduced growth rate, and there will be an increase in variation of sizes within the stock. In green water, there has to be a close monitoring of over-fertilization, which will then lead to algae bloom. Algae consumes oxygen at night and therefore competing with the fish. And if there is too much algae in the pond, there's a danger that the fish might suffocate because oxygen will be depleted. Suffocation will then lead to high mortalities. Why is it important that we give feeds to our fish? The first reason, we want our fish to grow faster, so we have to feed the fish. The feed we are giving to the fish will contain the required nutrients, the proteins, the carbohydrates, the vitamins, and the minerals. So that combination will help us to achieve fast growth. The other reason why we give feed to our fish is that we want our fish to look healthy so that they can also resist to diseases. In breeding fish, a balanced diet will also improve productivity. And because we are giving feed, there's a shorter production cycle. And this means that we can produce more per square meter per year. There's also improved survival rates. However, the use of commercial feeds in particular is high investment, but also giving high returns. Here is a good graph showing the reasons why we feed. Where there is no feed, the fish we have to look for natural foods. You can see the size of the fish is small, and where we use manure and fertilizer as feeds, the fish will be a little bigger than the fish that survives on natural foods. But when we go for the commercial feeds, those pellets, the formulated feeds, right? You can actually see the size of the fish will be bigger than all those fish that are feeding with manure. So we have to give feed for our fish to attain good yields. Let's look at the feed management of fish. For every business to succeed, there should be a good management strategy. So for us as fish farmers to attain maximum profits, we have to adopt appropriate feed management strategies. We should not overfeed or underfeed, as this may result in feed inefficiencies. Underfeeding has consequences of low growth rate, and this will then promote an increase in size variation within the stock. There's a feeding hierarchy that will form, and you will see those aggressive feeders will dominate the stock, as there will be a competition for feed. The smaller fish will remain smaller and the bigger fish will grow big because of competition. Overfeeding, it always results in wastage of feed. Because feed is money, we will be losing money in other terms. When we go to our ponds for feeding, we should feed our fish from the shallow ends of the pond at the same time and same place. Whilst the farmer is feeding, he has to take his time observing the fish behavior, fish response to the feed. He has also to take note of fish that are weak, fish that look not healthy, so that he can take precautions or he can take measures earlier before we have mortalities. When using floating pellets, they have an advantage over sinking pellets because they will allow the farmer to observe the fish response to the feed. The farmer can easily tell after feeding the leftovers or is his fish hungry, or are there any fish that did not feed well. So by using floating pellets, you can actually tell how much feed has been consumed, how much is left. So farmers that use commercial feed, they have to get the technical advice from the feed manufacturer that will determine the feed ration sizes and the feeding schedules. Okay. There is a table showing different feed types. We have got starter 0, which is powder-like, starter 1, a small crumble, starter 2, medium, and starter 3, these ones are large crumbles. We move on to juvenile 1. Juvenile 1, medium pellet, these ones are now pellets. Juvenile 2, large, they are medium pellets as well. Then the grower, these are large pellets. And for that column showing the crude protein, it starts higher and goes down as our fish grow big. It is 45% for starters, because we want our fish to start with a boom growth rate. So we have to have more protein for feed that we use for small fish, the fries and the fingerlings. Here, it's an example of the feeding regime or the feeding schedule. It shows the feed type, starter 1 to grower, then the duration that we are going to use that type of feed. For example, starter 1, where we'll be using starter 1 up to end of week 6. And it also shows the feed that is required for 1,000 fish. For example, here, for 1,000 fish, we only require a kg for starter 1. Then the feeds per day, 8 times per day. And the other column is showing the amount of feed that is given per each feeding. I got an example here. Juvenile 2. Juvenile 2 is used up from end of week 16 to end of week 20. So it makes a total of 4 weeks using Juvenile 2. And for that period, we are going to use 75 kgs. This is for 1,000 fish, right? That is 4 weeks are 28 days, right? So we are going to divide the feed we are going to use for that period, 75 kgs, divided by 28 days, and we will get 2.7 kgs per day. Per day, we say we are going to feed 3 times. So for us to get the amount of feed we are going to use per each feeding, we will then divide the 2.7 kgs we are going to use for a day by 3 times. We will get 0.8 kgs per feed. So that's how we go about the feeding schedule. There is a time when our fish may stop feeding. There are reasons for that. And these reasons include cooling. When there is a change in temperature, when there is a decline, to be specific, when there is a decline in temperature, fish do not feed well because fish are cold-blooded, so they will have no appetite during that period when temperatures are low. You can easily tell it's because of temperature. When the temperature gets normal, you will start to see your fish start feeding well. The other reason is low oxygen in the pond. If there is low oxygen in the pond, this will suppress the appetite of the fish, and the fish will not respond well to the feed. So there's a time when you see your fish gaping, that's a sign showing they are looking for oxygen. They will come at the surface of the pond looking for oxygen. How can we solve this? We can solve this by aeration or water exchange. If fish are attacked by a certain disease, they will not feed well. So the farmer has to look out for the signs and symptoms of the disease and seek advice from a vet if there is a disease suspected. The other reason why fish may not feed is overfeeding. Overfeeding will lead to waste at the bottom of the pond, and this waste will start to decompose. When the waste starts to decompose, it will deteriorate the water quality of the pond water, and our fish will not feed well because maybe the ammonia level will start to increase or the nitrate level will start to shoot up. So this will affect the appetite of the fish, and at the end, our fish will not respond well to the feed. Poor quality feed can also be a reason why the fish may not feed. Poor quality, poor texture, smell or size of the feed. If it's not ideal for a fish, then the fish will not feed well. Here are some points to remember. Always feed the fish according to the recommended feeding schedule that is given by the technical team. This will always help a farmer to calculate the amount of feed that the farmer has to give each day. And this will help the farmer also not to over or underfeed the fish. So our feeding schedule or the feeding regime is a guide to the farmer so that he knows how how much to feed, and the farmer should be feeding in accordance to the response of the feed. Whenever our fish are not responding well to the feed, we always advise the farmer not to feed. He has to stop feeding and look for the reasons why the fish are not feeding. For example, after rains, usually the temperatures go down and the fish do not feed well when the temperatures go down. Also, when the fish look unhealthy, or if they are sick, they do not feed well. So we have to stop feeding. Otherwise, if we continue feeding, we will worsen the problem, because that feed will then sink down at the bottom of the pond and start to decompose, thus deteriorating the water quality of the pond. The other point to always remember is always feed at the same time and place of the pond every day. When you are feeding at an hour interval, say at 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., you have to keep that interval. And for us to train our fish, we have to keep on feeding them at the same place. And as time goes on, you see your fish, if you are to feed at 9, they will come that time waiting for you to give them feed. As a rule of thumb, never ever feed pellets that are bigger than the size of your fish. Yeah, this brings me to the end of my presentation. And for follow-up questions, you can WhatsApp on 0785 989 060 or 0778 156 945. Thank you.